What if, in just one night, you realized that everything you had built with effort, pride, and faith no longer reflected who you truly were? That was the shock that pierced the heart of billionaire CEO Grant Ellsworth when, amid the clinking of silverware and the mechanical rush of weary waiters, his eyes caught a scene no one else seemed to notice: a waitress quietly wiping away her tears behind the kitchen door. In that instant, in absolute silence, he understood that it wasn't just an employee suffering. It was the reflection of something far greater, of an empire that had drifted away from the essence that had once given it life. And it was in that contrast, between the sparkle of crystal glasses and the hidden pain of a waitress, that the night began to change. Rain fell like a silver veil over Manhattan, dissolving the city's lights into trembling reflections in the puddles on the asphalt. Taxis sped by, leaving trails of water suspended in the air, and the shop windows shimmered like illuminated aquariums, each one hiding stories too easily ignored by the rush of life. It was in this setting that a yellow cab stopped at the corner of 69th Street. From the back door stepped a man who, to any hurried glance, seemed like just another tired New Yorker seeking shelter from the cold night. The dark coat hid his broad frame, already marked by age. The raised collar shielded his face from the drops the wind kept throwing at him. At 60, gray streaks lined his temples, and deep lines shaped his expression. That man was billionaire CEO Grant Ellsworth. Yet no one passing him on that sidewalk could have guessed it. That night, there were no luxury drivers, no vigilant bodyguards, no secretaries juggling schedules. There were no expensive watches gleaming under the streetlights, no spotlights of recognition. The billionaire had dressed in ordinary clothes, taken a taxi, and with firm steps, cloaked in anonymity, went to his very first restaurant, determined to confront a question that had haunted him for months. What had happened to the heart of his empire? The billionaire, owner of a vast gastronomic empire, had built his life starting from a small restaurant, barely a forgotten corner in its early days. He remembered the nights when he himself washed dishes because the helper hadn't shown up, the days when he memorized each customer's name so that everyone would feel part of something greater. It was there, between wooden tables and worn tablecloths, that he had learned the lesson that would change his destiny. Hospitality was not about food, but about people. 40 years later, his name shone on facades across 3 states. Ellsworth House had become a synonym for refinement and prestige, attracting couples in search of special experiences as well as executives signing million-dollar contracts over dinner. But along with expansion came what Grant feared the most: distance. Reports began to replace conversations. Charts became more important than stories. Managers presented spreadsheets but rarely spoke about people. And in recent months, despite the insistence that customer satisfaction remained high, Grant had heard whispers of a different kind: veiled complaints, cold service, employees resigning without clear explanations. He knew well the nature of numbers. They can always be shaped to please. But instinct never lies. And his instinct told him something was wrong. That is why, on this night, he decided to return to the beginning. Not as an owner, not as an icon, but as a customer. He knew that, before the night was over, he would see the restaurant where it all began in a new light, and he would have to face truths that could change not only his own life but the lives of others as well. And you? Have you ever lived a moment when a simple scene changed the way you see life? Share your story in the comments by writing truth if you believe an unexpected revelation can transform even the hardest heart. The bronze sign glistened under the rain. Ellsworth House. The same facade, the same warmth shining through the glass doors. For a second, Grant felt young again, as if it were possible to go back in time and find the young man who had once dreamed there. But reality struck back like a punch. What he was about to discover might be nothing like what he expected. The billionaire, now disguised as a regular customer, pushed open the door. The warm air of the dining hall enveloped him at once, carrying the scent of grilled meats and fresh spices. At first, everything seemed in order. Tables filled, laughter echoing through the room, candlelight flickering against crystal glasses. But it only took a few seconds for him to sense the difference. The dining hall was alive, and yet, at the same time, dead. The waiters moved like clockwork pieces, quick but soulless. Greetings were automatic, their expressions rigid. The laughter that came from some tables sounded more like noise than true joy. It was like watching a play rehearsed too many times, in which every actor had already forgotten why they were on stage. A hostess greeted him without lifting her eyes fully from her phone. She muttered, "Table for one," in a hollow voice and led him to the worst corner of the dining room, a table squeezed near the service doors. She dropped the menu with indifference and disappeared. Grant sat down. From his spot, he could see everything. And it was there, among the trays rushing back and forth, that his heart grew heavy. At the center of the dining room stood Travis Kent, the house manager. Impeccable suit, slicked hair, short and impatient steps. He spoke little, but every gesture said more than words, his finger tapping the watch to hurry waiters, his eyebrow raised in disapproval, his showroom smile whenever customers looked his way. He was the kind of leader who suffocates rather than inspires. And then he saw her, waitress Margot Bennett. She was in her 40s, her uniform plain, her bun undone from the rush, but she carried a timeless beauty that endured despite age and exhausting routine. She wasn't the youngest on the team, but she had something no one else possessed: presence. While others hurried, Margot lingered. While smiles around her were forced, hers reached her eyes. Grant watched her refill a glass before it emptied, listen with full attention to the story of an elderly guest, calm a restless child by folding a napkin into a little boat. Small gestures, yet they embodied the true spirit of hospitality. And then came the moment that cut him. As she turned to deliver a delayed order, the waitress received a sharp reprimand from Travis. His voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to humiliate her. "Focus, Bennett. The dining room doesn't need sentiment, it needs efficiency." She nodded in silence, shoulders shrinking. But when she passed through the kitchen door, Grant noticed what no one else did. Her hand rose discreetly to her face, wiping away a quick tear before returning to work. The impact was immediate. The billionaire CEO, owner of an empire, leaned back in his chair. His heart sank. In this restaurant, his restaurant, someone was suffering in silence. And perhaps that tear was only the first clue to a much larger truth. At that moment, the billionaire decided he would not leave as just another customer. Before the night ended, he would uncover just how deep the coldness hidden beneath numbers and statistics ran, and the human cost it was already demanding. But between orders and service, something broke the rhythm of the night. The first mistake was banal: mashed potatoes served instead of gratin. The waitress noticed before the table could complain, apologized calmly, and rushed to fix it. But the kitchen was behind, and the air already carried tension. The relentless manager, Travis Kent, appeared like a timekeeper, showroom smile and eyes of stone. "Bennett, aren't you checking the tickets?" he snapped. "I did, Mr. Kent." The kitchen switched the side dish. "I'm already fixing it." "Always an excuse," he retorted, straightening his jacket. "We don't pay for excuses here. We pay for precision." The waitress swallowed hard and slipped into the pantry. From the dining hall, the billionaire, still disguised as a regular guest, saw only the tip of her apron vanish into the corridor. That was enough to notice the weight on her shoulders, the kind of weight borne not from a single wrong dish, but from entire journeys. In the narrow corridor, between steam and tiled walls, Margot set down her tray, took a deep breath, and let out a quick, almost forbidden tear. A small gesture, but enough for Grant to understand. No one cries over a simple mistake. "Tough night, isn't it?" said a young waiter beside Grant, balancing glasses. His name tag read Evan. "The place is full," murmured the billionaire, still posing as just another man in the room. "And the manager seems quite demanding, doesn't he?" Evan gave a humorless laugh. "Demanding is an understatement. Bennett works double shifts every single day, here and at a diner on Lexington. She only stays because she loves the customers. Anyone else would have quit long ago. Double shifts. Adjusted hours." Words that never made it into reports. Grant stored away every detail, revealing nothing. Minutes later, the waitress returned with a golden gratin, setting it before the table with composure and even offering a courtesy as a gesture of goodwill. A couple smiled, grateful. Grant noticed. Within this woman lived an invisible dignity, The silent art of keeping alive the idea that dining out could still be a small miracle. Margot was not made of fragility, though the double shifts tried to prove otherwise. She came from a childhood where she had learned early on to turn lack into discipline. The smile she offered customers was not a mask, but a conscious choice. She believed kindness was the only inheritance she could leave to the world, even when almost nothing was left for herself. Between one dish and the next, she carried in her heart a silent purpose. It was not merely about paying bills, but about sustaining a home where hope still breathed. She cared for her ailing mother and quietly helped her younger siblings, never using it as an excuse to fail. Her motto was simple: my effort should never be seen, only the result. Travis, the nitpicking manager, however, only saw metrics. He hounded her with constant demands, counting seconds and tables as if every gesture were a delay. The guests at Table 7 asked for the check 4 minutes ago. Table 12 wants wine, and that other table is still waiting for cutlery. And you're wasting time practicing charity. I've already taken care of it, sir, Margot replied, firm but weary. And are those people over there chatting, or just killing time? The manager sneered. An idle table is a loss. Watching everything unfold, the billionaire ordered a coffee just to maintain his cover, but his eyes recorded everything. Among the papers near the pantry, he noticed a memo pinned with a magnet. 10% of tips would be diverted to a loss fund. Signed in his name, but not by his hand. The dining room, at that moment, was boiling. A table of executives began complaining in unison, pressing Margot with impatience. This is fine dining, not fast food. Do you know how long this is taking? I understand your frustration, sir. The dish was delayed 2 minutes because we prioritized the steak's doneness, she answered, her voice calm but weighted with fatigue. Then learn how to work. And smile, you're paid for that. Grant felt his body lean forward to intervene, but he held back. It was the manager who swept in, theatrically. Good evening, gentlemen. Travis Kent, house manager. Has there been an inconvenience? One of the executives pointed at Margot. Uncoordinated service. And your employee thinks customers need patience. Travis smiled at the table, not at her. My deepest apologies. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, Bennett, you're embarrassing me. Maybe you're not ready for this house's standard. A dense silence spread. Conversations halted, eyes turned. The waitress held her posture. She did not apologize. She did not beg. She only lifted her chin and returned the executive's stare with dignity. The complimentary dessert is already on its way, she said clearly, before stepping aside. But Travis didn't miss the chance to drive the blade deeper. Incompetence has no place here. And there's a line outside waiting to replace you. From the dining room, his voice echoed arrogantly. Don't worry, gentlemen. I'll personally reassign the team. And Bennett, after your shift, in my office. We'll review your hours. Review. Reassign. Those words were like sharp knives in the wrong hands. Grant closed his fist inside his pocket. Took a deep breath. The moment had come. He turned back to the dining room, and for the first time that night, the mask of a mere customer began to slip. His back straightened, his eyes hardened. The owner of the empire no longer fit inside the disguise. The fuse had been lit. The clock on the wall neared 9, and the dining room had lost the freshness of the early evening. Rush had turned into restrained irritation, and even the guests' laughter sounded harsher. Grant Ellsworth watched everything from his corner, but his eyes never strayed far from Margot Bennett. He noticed every detail, the way she pressed the tray against her hip, the quick wipe she gave a glass, the smile she offered even as her body cried out for rest. After Travis's public scolding, something had changed in her movements. Not surrender, but a quiet firmness, like someone refusing to collapse under doubled weight. When the waitress passed near his table, Grant raised a polite gesture, requesting her attention. She approached, notepad in hand, ready to take an order. "Are you enjoying your meal?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Grant studied her for a second before replying. He pretended to be nothing more than a cordial customer. "The food is good," he said, pausing. "But I couldn't help but notice. The work here seems rather heavy." Margot blinked slowly, surprised by the comment. Normally, customers wanted wine, dishes, quick attention. Few cared enough to ask. "It's part of the job," she answered, trying to end the subject. "Maybe," Grant replied calmly. "But from the way you move, it seems like you're carrying more than trays." She drew a deep breath, as if weighing whether to open the door or leave it shut. In the end, perhaps too tired to wear masks, she decided to speak. "I work here until closing," she said, glancing briefly toward the pantry. "And then I head to another place. A diner on Lexington. I go through the night shift, so you may have noticed a bit of tiredness in me, but I like it here a lot. It feels like my second home." Grant did not hide his surprise. "2 jobs." Margot nodded. "You do what you have to do. My mother is undergoing treatment, and the costs are high. I also have 2 younger brothers. They deserve a better chance than I had." She didn't say it with drama, nor with lament. It was simply a fact, laid on the table like a hot dish. Grant felt a tightening in his chest. He had read hundreds of stories in HR reports, but they never sounded like this, never so close, with the person's breath mixing with the smell of coffee. "And how do you endure it?" he ventured. Margot lifted her eyes to him, tired but steady. "As I said, I like it here. I take pride in serving good food and making people happy. But I have to manage everything, so I keep both jobs." There was no rehearsed line, no cheap idealism. Only a raw truth that hung in the air. It struck him harder than any motivational speech ever could. Grant opened his mouth to respond, but had no time. The manager appeared like a shadow at the side of the table. "Bennett," he said, tone sharp, loud enough for the neighboring tables to notice. "Is everything all right? Chatting with customers? Aren't you taking too long with service?" Margot straightened immediately. "Just checking if everything was fine at the table, sir." "Checking." Travis let out a short laugh, dripping with irony. "Sounds more like gossip than service. And gossip doesn't fill the register." Margot began, but Travis cut her off with a hand gesture. "Enough. After your shift, my office. If you can't focus, you don't belong here. And to make it clear for everyone, last warning, Bennett. Next mistake, you're out." Margot pressed her notepad against her chest. Her face remained serene, but her eyes betrayed the blow. She only nodded and walked away, returning to the tables as if nothing had happened. The billionaire sat stunned, motionless, watching her disappear among the guests. But inside, he was no longer just a businessman reviewing faulty reports. He was a man who, faced with the tears of an overlooked employee, felt the weight of a choice about to be made. And he knew, the next step would not be taken as a customer. The clock neared 10, and the dining room had entered that phase where noise begins to sting the ears. Loud laughter, silverware clashing against plates, waiters rushing to keep the gears turning. Yet beneath the background music and the clinking glasses, there was something heavier, a diffuse unease, almost imperceptible, that Grant Ellsworth felt growing by the minute. He had observed enough. Margot, resilient, kept working her shift as if nothing had happened, but Grant saw the shadow of exhaustion in her every gesture. The manager, on the other hand, strutted through the dining room like a king without a throne, straightening his tie, correcting waiters with stern looks, flashing artificial smiles at important clients. It was a poorly rehearsed play, and everyone was acting under the tyranny of his voice. Grant drank the last sip of his now cold coffee and drew a deep breath. He decided it was time to stop watching. And that was when the spark was struck. At a central table, 3 executives, cheerful, with bottles of expensive wine, Margot was called back. She approached with her notepad in hand, patient despite her exhaustion. The most talkative of the group, already slightly drunk, tapped the rim of his glass with a finger. "We ordered the second bottle of wine 10 minutes ago. Is this a restaurant or a rehearsal in incompetence?" Margot answered calmly, explaining that the bottle was being opened and checked at the bar. But the man didn't want to listen. "Listen, darling," he snapped, clicking his fingers in front of her. "If you can't handle it, ask for help. We're not here to wait." Before she could reply, Travis appeared, drawn like a vulture to the scent of conflict. "What's going on here?" he asked, already raising his voice. "Slow service," the executive said, with a half-smile of contempt. "And your employee doesn't understand priorities." Travis didn't hesitate. He turned to Margot with a look of ice. "How many times do I have to repeat myself, Bennett? The customer comes first. If you can't deliver, you shouldn't be here." "The order is on its way, sir," Margot said, steadying her breath. "On its way," Travis repeated in a mocking tone, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Do you know how that sounds? Like an excuse. And excuses don't pay the bills." The entire dining room began to quiet. Nearby guests pretended not to listen, but their glances were fixed on the scene. Margot stood still, clutching her notepad to her chest. Grant couldn't take it any longer. He stood up. "That's enough." The words cut the air like a knife. They weren't shouted, but spoken with firmness and authority. Travis turned to him, surprised. "What did you say?" "I said, enough." The billionaire took 2 steps forward, voice steady. "I've seen enough tonight." Travis lifted his chin, trying to regain control. The cynical smile returned to his lips. "Listen, sir. Customer," he emphasized the word. "I know some people like to meddle, but this is an internal matter. It has nothing to do with you." The billionaire held his gaze. "It has everything to do with me." Silence in the dining room grew even heavier. Even the background music seemed to fade. Margot, confused, looked from one to the other, not understanding. Travis let out a short, derisive laugh. "Of course. Another customer who thinks he can teach us how to run a restaurant. Listen, sir, with all respect, you don't know who I am here. I run this place." Grant inhaled deeply, then did what he hadn't planned. He took his wallet from his coat pocket. He opened it slowly, removed a laminated card, and raised it just enough for Travis to see. "You don't know who I am." Travis frowned, stepped forward, and took the card to read. When his eyes scanned the name embossed on it, Grant Ellsworth, the color seemed to drain from his face. Grant didn't raise his voice. He simply spoke, with a calm that felt more threatening than any shout. "I am the actual owner of this chain, and this is one of my restaurants." The dining room froze. Glasses hovered mid-air, cutlery paused, and every gaze converged on that point. The waitress brought her hand to her mouth, astonished. The manager turned pale as if his tie had suddenly tightened, and tried to stammer. "Mr. Ellsworth, I didn't know that." Grant didn't let him finish. "Exactly. You didn't know. You didn't know I could walk in at any time. You didn't know I would hear how you speak to your staff. You didn't know I would see you humiliate the very people who carry this restaurant on their backs." With every sentence, the tone rose half a step, not in fury, but in weight. The customers watched in fascination, witnessing a scene they would never forget. Grant took a step forward, staring Travis down. "When I started, 40 years ago, I washed the dishes and served the tables myself. I knew that every person here had a name, a life, and dignity. And you turned this place into a cold machine where tears are hidden behind doors." Travis tried to respond. "I only follow policies," he stammered. Grant raised the memo he had pulled from the bulletin board minutes earlier. "Policies forged in my name." He shook the paper in the air. "I never authorized cutting employees' tips. Never. And from now on, no one will believe you again when you use my name to justify exploitation." The murmur of the clients spread through the dining room. Some clapped discreetly. Others nodded, as if confirming a rightful verdict. Grant turned his eyes back to Travis, now frozen. "You're fired. I want you out of my restaurant right now." The manager opened his mouth, But no words came. He simply stepped back, as if the ground had vanished beneath his feet. The dining room followed his every move, the tension almost tangible. Grant turned to everyone. From today on, changes will be made. I don't ever want to see employees treated like disposable parts again. The Ellsworth name has always stood for respect. And if anyone here doubts that, you can stand up right now and leave along with him. The silence was broken by applause. At first timid, then swelling. Customers and even some waiters began clapping, relieved, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from the air. Margot stood frozen, shocked, her hands trembling as they held her order pad. Grant looked at her, and for a moment, softened his tone. You will never be treated like that again. None of you will. Travis, defeated, grabbed his jacket from the rack near the entrance and walked out without looking back. The billionaire drew a deep breath, his heart racing. For the first time in years, he felt again like the young man who had opened his first restaurant. Not a man surrounded by numbers, but someone ready to defend values. The dining room still buzzed with murmurs and applause, but inside him there was a different silence, the certainty that this night would not be forgotten, and that the true work, rebuilding the spirit of his own house, was only beginning. The hall remained in shock. Customers spoke in low voices, commenting on what they had just witnessed. The waiters, scattered in strategic points, didn't know whether to return to the tables or wait for orders. The void left by Travis Kent was palpable, but along with it came something else, a silence heavy with expectation. Grant Ellsworth took a deep breath. He looked around and saw the eyes fixed on him, staff and customers alike, waiting for a decision. Firing a manager wasn't enough. He needed to rebuild the soul of the house. He took a few steps to the center of the dining room, where everyone could hear him. Tonight you witnessed something that should never have happened. His voice was firm, but without harshness. Humiliation has never been part of this house's DNA. And it never will be again. The employees exchanged glances. No one moved. Grant went on. I know many of you have worked under fear. Fear of making mistakes, fear of losing hours, fear of not being heard. That ends tonight. From now on, I want each of you to feel part of this family. Because a restaurant is not built with bricks and recipes alone. It is built with people. Some waiters bowed their heads, moved. The head chef appeared discreetly from the kitchen door, listening in silence. Starting tomorrow, Grant said, looking directly at the staff, we will hold weekly meetings. I want to hear suggestions, complaints, ideas. The customer is important, of course, but the foundation of every service is the dignity of those who serve. And you will have that dignity respected. Spontaneous applause broke out from a table in the corner, then from another, until it spread throughout the dining room. Grant raised his hand, asking for calm. Now, finish this night with professionalism. Serve the guests as if each one were a special visitor in your own homes. Starting tomorrow, we will walk together in a new direction. The staff nodded, relieved. It was as if a chain had been broken. The atmosphere of the restaurant shifted instantly. Waiters returned to the tables with lighter expressions, the kitchen found a renewed rhythm, and even the customers seemed to savor their meals in a different way. But Grant still had something to settle. Bennett, he said firmly, calling Margot. I need to speak with you. She nodded discreetly, handed a tray to a colleague, and followed him to a more secluded corner of the dining room, near the window where the rain still traced lines on the glass. Grant remained silent for a few seconds, staring out at the wet street. He was more tired than he cared to admit, but there was a renewed clarity in his eyes. Margot stood steady, though her heart quickened. "Do you know why I called you here?" he asked at last. "I imagine it's because of what happened," Margot replied cautiously. "Not just that." Grant turned to face her. "Tonight I saw something in you that I haven't seen in this house for a long time. While others rushed to complete tasks, you cared. Not only about orders, but about people. That cannot be ignored." Margot blushed, lowering her eyes. "I only did what I thought was right. And that is exactly why I want to talk about the future," Grant said. I need someone to represent the values I built when I opened my first restaurant. Someone to lead the team, not through fear, but by example." She lifted her gaze, incredulous. "You're saying that? I want you to take over as floor manager." His voice left no room for doubt. "I need someone who can guide others with respect and firmness. You already do this, even without the title. It's time to make it official." Margot drew a deep breath, processing it. "Mr. Ellsworth, I don't know if I'm the right person." "But I do," he answered without hesitation. "Because I never asked for perfection. I asked for humanity. And that you have in abundance." For a moment, she couldn't speak. She held onto her notepad as if it were the last anchor to the life she knew. "If you accept," Grant continued, "you'll have the full support of the management. And I also want to guarantee one thing. You will no longer have to exhaust yourself working 2 jobs. We will adjust your pay and benefits so that you can dedicate yourself fully here." Margot bit her lip, moved. "I wasn't expecting this." "Neither was I expecting to find someone like you tonight," Grant said sincerely. "But sometimes the best answers appear when we stop looking at reports and start looking at people." A brief silence fell. Outside, a taxi passed, smearing the reflection of the lights. Inside, the waitress lifted her eyes, now steady. "Then I accept. But not for the title. I accept because I believe this place can become what you described. I want to help rebuild it." Grant gave a genuine smile. "That's exactly the answer I hoped to hear." He extended his hand. Margot hesitated only for a second before taking it. The gesture was firm, not of subordination, but of partnership. When they returned to the dining room, Margot was greeted by the curious eyes of the staff. Grant made sure to announce in a clear voice, "Starting tomorrow, Margot Bennett will be the new floor manager of this house. Trust her, because I trust her." The applause that followed was not merely formal. It carried relief and hope. Margot felt tears threaten, but she held them back. She simply smiled. Grant watched the scene, a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel he bore the burden of his empire alone. Here was someone capable of sharing not only tasks, but values. As the night went on and customers returned to their lively conversations, the restaurant felt like a different place. Not because of the walls, nor the food, but because something invisible had shifted. Trust was back. Grant knew the real work would begin the next day. There would be adjustments, meetings, resistance. But as he looked at Margot, now calmly guiding her colleagues, already stepping naturally into her new role, he was certain of one thing: the heart of his empire was beating again. In a restaurant that once seemed lost, Grant Ellsworth had found not only a future for his business, but a living reminder of what truly mattered: the dignity of every person who wore a uniform with his name on it. On that rainy night, it wasn't just a restaurant that changed course. It was an empire that rediscovered its soul. Grant Ellsworth understood that numbers never tell the whole story, and that behind every tray, every smile, and every tear, there is a life that deserves respect. And Margot Bennett showed that true greatness is not found in titles or positions, but in living with dignity, even when no one seems to notice. Sometimes, all it takes is a careful eye to transform silent tears into renewed hope. Because in the end, every company, every home, and every heart can only stand strong when they learn to value people. If this story touched you, leave your amen or truth in the comments and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and leave your like, so we can keep bringing you stories that inspire, move, and remind us that hope still exists in the world.